We are all here for Brian's wonderful session, Beyond Copilot, Building Agentic AI in Municipalities.
So thanks so much, Amy, and thank you everyone for joining today. It's great to be with you here. I started one of Canada's first consulting practices there, led a team of product and service folks, and inside of that sort of leadership, we experimented quite a lot with AI, integrated it into our products. So much so that I started getting, I would say, concerned or thoughtful about AI risk, and wanted to go a little bit deeper on the topic. So I've spent some time really thinking about and understanding what's out there for AI risk management and governance, and what are people doing to safely adopt AI, and started a blog called allofushumans.com, which I write on that topic. Currently, the focus as the director of artificial intelligence here at Gravity Union is looking at helping organizations roll out Copilot and all that kind of related AI support materials, Copilot Studio, AI Foundry, Fabric, which we'll all talk about all these today. And so 25 years in the space of Microsoft, and hopefully jumping on the right train as the train moves forward to help organizations take advantage of AI, which I think is going to make a big impact in our world. Gravity Union is a Microsoft solutions partner in the modern workspace. We have folks around Canada. Most of our clients are in Canada, although we have a few in the US, but largely organizations that have higher needs for compliance. So municipal organizations are kind of a specialty for us, because so much of what you do does need to have to be managed well, tracked, and often disposed of properly. So to do that, we have lots of partnerships in addition to Microsoft that support us. AvePoint and Orchestry I put there at the top because specific to this conversation, they are actually implementing and rolling out new AI management tools. And so managing your agents and Copilot and understanding how Copilot's being used. Some of that comes from Microsoft, but some of it also comes from these third-party relationships out in the market. That we have others here that you'll see that are more around compliance and records management. For the last few years, we've been involved in a program that Microsoft called the Microsoft Content AI Partner Program, which is where they birthed some of their tools like Syntax and lots of the new features in Viva Engage. So much of the AI capabilities that you're seeing today, and even in Copilot, were kind of birthed through this group. And then the other group that's related, I would say they're kind of the other side of the coin, and was the Microsoft Risk Compliance and Advisory Program we were invited to. So one of 25 folks to help Microsoft evolve their perspective and their tools around compliance and risk management for content. And so Purview actually fell into this group's oversight. And so we have quite a few of those. Just because I'm a newbie to starting polls in Teams, I did not get this set up properly. So Amy, I'm hoping maybe folks could take just a second in the chat and type in where you're at in your AI journey, and we'll come back to just reading what you've put in the chat. But I'd love to get a feel for the room. Like, are we just starting your AI journey? Are you in a start of an implementing Copilot phase? Have you matured there and you're pushing Copilot to the limit and you're trying to use agents and maybe frustrated over that or successful over that? Or are you really pushing the pedal down and automating more complex IA? So just you don't have to write the whole sentence, but anything that kind of indicates where you're at in your journey. And we'll come back to you kind of reviewing what your comments are in just a moment. So today, what we'll cover is discussing the municipal opportunity, and I would say the dilemma with AI that kind of maybe is unique to municipalities. I'll help you kind of dissect and understand the Microsoft agent landscape. So the word agent being kind of the word of the day for automation. That's using AI. We'll dig into Microsoft 365 Copilot agents, how they work and why they work that way. I think it's a really important kind of understanding that lots of people just have a gap with, and understandably, it's not an easy thing to dissect from Microsoft documentation. And then we'll match some use cases, and we'll use some common ones I've seen in municipalities with agent technologies, and why one technology might be a better fit than another. So help you kind of navigate the going beyond Copilot story. When I kicked off this year, I really wanted to understand how to drive or how to help support organizations around AI. We had, at the time, by the beginning of 2025, done a bit of work in AI with clients over the last few years, some of it quite fun and complex, some of it super simple, like document processing. But given the deployment of Copilot and our increased interest from clients, I wanted to know where people were at. So I interviewed a bunch of CIOs, CTOs, tech leaders in Canadian municipalities, directors of IT. And in some of these cases, we actually had built some AI solutions for them. And my desire was to build a maturity model. So who were the trailblazers? Who were the early adopters? Who did I feel was like really kind of behind just vis-a-vis those 30 CIOs, but maybe also the market. And what I found was that plotting this AI use on a single linear kind of maturity model proved really impossible. I found this kind of fascinating, complex matrix of AI engagement. So there could have been lots of variation in AI familiarity. So even within a single team, so possibly a single person or two that had very advanced understanding of AI, and then a bunch of people who hadn't even touched a model yet. There was just bespoke departmental use. So certain departments within the cities had taken it upon themselves to perhaps purchase a third-party product or vendor relationship where they were really exploiting AI. So things like, camera analysis on streets and analysis for trash and other kind of really interesting use cases in AI's use. Various undefined or kind of high variations in risk tolerance. So not a particularly easy perspective to dissect around what people were considering risky and what they weren't. It seemed to differ from every municipality. The AI tool familiarity was complex. And AI was widely defined different between each municipality. Even in places where I knew we had done AI work, sometimes they didn't even refer to that work as AI driven. So they had this very specific view of, oh, that means using an LLM. And so I couldn't plot it on a single line. What I did hear, though, in terms of growth barriers and things that were stalling or perhaps keeping people behind was the first one there is this lack of or slow development of AI values, guidelines, and policies. So some people were getting stuck at, we have this department, perhaps it's the records management department that's trying to come out with some policies here, or we're still working on them. And that whole research and understanding and bringing the company along process was slow. There were security concerns, largely around oversharing. That seemed to be kind of the biggest one, but some people hadn't done their research yet on whether or not Copilot was going to meet their security needs, or any tool would for that matter. There often was a kind of lacking general knowledge of AI, so they were sort of going by what Microsoft had been selling them or telling them. Maybe there was kind of an advanced user that knew some things, and they were trying to drive it into a very specific direction. I found that some people mentioned there were barriers with city management or council. So people had either concerns or doubts, and they were using those to really slow the deployments. And then, there's in many municipalities, and this is just the way they work, is that there's a lot of departmental autonomy. Things aren't necessarily driven from a single kind of IT viewpoint. And so this really demands that each of those departments have their own kind of drive towards AI, and in many cases that just doesn't happen when you don't have the right people. So that's kind of tied to the last one, which is you can't, IT doesn't necessarily, based on how budgets work, they have the autonomy to just go and purchase AI for people or help drive it. They have to kind of work with departments to drive those use cases. Whereas in, I say, public or non-public organizations, IT often has a bit more of the control of the wheel on that one. What I did find as I went through is, there's this various states of Copilot adoption, everything from zero use to people who are in the kind of early testing or kind of rolling it out parts of it. Folks that were in this agent building process, so they got excited about Copilot, they're starting to build agents, or they were starting to use really advanced use cases in Azure, often because they were frustrated by Copilot's capabilities. And I would say, in general, it's not a science, but I would find the more people were starting to push Copilot into these agent experiments or complex agent processes, the kind of more frustrated they got and more disillusioned they got with both Copilot's capabilities or what AI was capable of. As they moved, I guess, that threshold into Azure, they got happier again, but that was a fairly big leap. And so it made me really curious, like, what what is it about Copilot agent development that makes it difficult? What blocks people? Why is it not working well? And yeah, answering the question, what was complicating it for people? One thing that was complicating it, I used AI to build this a few months ago, but Microsoft was just naming everything a Copilot. Everything in their suite was getting Copilot status. So even in just the M365 apps alone, you have Copilot for Outlook and Copilot for Word and Copilot for PowerPoint, and all of those actually work relatively differently. They have different agents and different technology driving them. They can do different things. And so it's very confusing to kind of stay on top of that. But maybe even worse, Copilot was starting to just sort of everywhere. You had Copilots that were in non-M365 products, like the Security Copilot or Copilots in Purview or GitHub. You had connectors that were Copilot connectors or Power Platform connectors. Copilot declarative agents and custom engine agents and Microsoft Agents Toolkit and the Teams AI library. These are all tools and things that Microsoft was using to drive Copilot use. And it just became really confusing as to which of these tools people should select and what was the right way to build these agents. Am I still sharing? Yeah, okay, I think I am. See it there. So this insight sort of married my own experience with Copilot. So I came into Gravity Union and we built a RFP proposal writing tool. And our first hypothesis was, we should be able to use Copilot to, and not just AI, but Copilot specifically to summarize RFPs that come into us, provide, positioning feedback based on a really super prompt and understanding who our company is, and then help us author answers. Like we answer the same questions all the time in RFPs. How can we do this quicker? Still obviously needing a human to look at it, but wanting to just speed up this proposal answering journey. And so we did, as what I would say good people should do when they're building out agents, is really mapping that process. So I think this is a pretty standard way of thinking about AI automation, is to still do that workflow diagram. And in our case, we kind of mapped our RFP process, everything from finding it to summarizing it to drafting proposal questions in the body and helping write to reviewing it and making sure that everything sounds copacetic and getting it out to customers. And if we zoom into these little areas here, we would hypothesize, we'd answer what we were doing in that part of the process. So what are we doing when we're summarizing the RFP? So we're discerning some key requirements. We're looking at deadlines. We're looking out for missing details. And what could AI do? Like, could AI do this for us? Could it actually discern those key requirements, summarize them, pull out the deadlines, help us look for questions that we might need to ask based on things that we always want? And so that we looked across all those gray areas. This is kind of where we started to summarize the RFP process, draft the proposal body, and support the writing. And when we started to use Copilot, we started with some low-code prompting. Eventually we found we weren't getting what we want, so we tried to use a bit more complex Power Platform agent building. So we were trying to route questions to different knowledge sources because we have lots of different kinds of RFPs we respond to. That didn't really work, so we thought, well, maybe if we dumb it down, we're going to go from something that's kind of complex, and we'll just start to break this up into single agent pieces and make it a lot simpler. We had challenges with how we accessed our knowledge, so our previous content, such as previous proposals. We even cleaned out our content because we were finding it still was returning poor answers, and we thought, well, maybe it's just picking up stuff from bad RFPs that we've written. And we experimented with a bunch of capabilities in Copilot, went through about 20 versions of prompting. It was quite a long process to experiment with it. No matter what we did, we found that every user using this agent would get wildly different results. Our content was far inferior to ChatGPT. And it was even if we were using what we consider the same model, although we don't know what model Copilot was using. The quality would vary from question to question. We'd have very, different variations in the way we had asked the question could elicit really different responses from the agent. And content was just often wrong or full of hallucination. And so I want to just pause for a moment and talk about AI quality benchmarking. I'm hearing a trend that people are starting to get used to AI not being that great, or that we're getting used to, oh, it returns the answer, but you always have to check the answer. And having been in the AI world for a long time, this is not great. I don't think this is actually what we should be doing. We should be really pushing AI quality and having it be at least as good as a human, if not better. And the way that we do that is by benchmarking. And I understand that not everything is a one size fits all. And so if you're doing a document review, or you're having an agent help you write something, or you're doing some research, those have a lot of room for the agent to give you something wrong, because you're probably going to still do your own work on the document and fix it yourself. But as you move towards the other side, where we have bots answering questions or exploring data or insights, we want the quality to be a lot better and consistency to be better. So I feel like we need to drive towards this.
There was a great question that came in, Brian, that I think is quite relevant based on the slide you're showing here. Could you please explain or define what you mean by agent?
Great question. Yeah, I'm actually going to go through quite a lot of like terminology today. So I love that someone paused on that one, because I want to make sure everyone kind of feels caught up enough. So when we use AI, one of the things that we do is we have this model that sits out there that answers questions for us. So AI, typically when we're using AI, is using some sort of intelligence that we're accessing. It's like a brain, and we call that the model. So when we use the word agent, or sometimes you'll hear the word agentic, we're talking about automation, basically. Automation that's using or leveraging an LLM. So it's a great question. When we're building these agents, like let's say we're building a chatbot, I believe we should be doing this sort of quality benchmarking. So thinking about what are the kinds of questions people could ask, and then judging our responses, like how well is the system or the agent actually answering these questions? Are they answering them properly, accurately? Is it consistent between users? And in some cases, and if you're doing this for an important chatbot, like a city website, for example, you actually want to benchmark it against a human. Well, how would a human answer this question? And is this agent close to the human response in terms of quality? So this benchmarking method, I feel like we need to be doing it more, not less, because I don't think it's a great direction for us to go to start to assume that our answers are probably going to be wrong. If you want a little bit more detail about this, Amy's going to post this link in the chat, but I have a friend who has created a chat bot for the People's Law School, and well, a couple of friends, actually. They are old business partners that I love. And they have done an amazing job summarizing how they managed to get this legal chatbot to answer questions, very complex legal questions, in a way that has 99.9% accuracy to test and tested by lawyers and rated by lawyers. So an amazing job to increase the quality of the chatbot, and this is how they did that. So obviously, my expectations and the reality of AI were off. With my proposal writing tool. And I have a feeling a lot of people on the call, if you've been using Copilot, you might have experienced the same thing, where there's these places where it works really well, and there's these places where it doesn't work really well. And why is that? And I came to the conclusion I shouldn't be mad at Copilot, because I was just experiencing some unfulfilled expectations. My expectations were higher than Copilot was ready for. And so I sought out to answer the question, where is Copilot disappointing people? And what should we expect of it? And how should we judge it? And when do we go somewhere else in this journey? You may have seen this. It's a complex slide. It's a way that Microsoft describes how Copilot is working. And this is kind of the first place I started. Because it's a pretty good diagram that at least explains the kind of prompt flow that you get from Copilot. When a user asks something, how is Copilot going out to try and understand how to answer this question? When does it actually send it to a large language model, this sort of brain of the AI? And how does all this sort of traffic move through that? Part of this diagram is to help show you how securely Copilot manages information, but the other part is just really helping you understand this thing called grounding. Another word for grounding that I'm going to be using is RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. And so what that is if I'm sending something to a large language model and I'm prompting, such as like I'm a chatbot and I ask the question, will my son have retainer benefits through his dental plan? The chatbot or the agent first needs to go look for information that might help answer that question. And that process of looking for information is called grounding. The process of sending and packaging that information to send it to a large language model is called the RAG, or the retrieval augmented generation. And in the case of Copilot, all of this is a bit obscured. We don't actually know exactly how this is working, or at least we didn't. So I'll help describe how it's working today. One thing that helped me on this journey, though, was my discovery of the transparency note for Copilot and M365 Copilot. And so this is a really lengthy article that Microsoft's released, and they've been continually updating it, describing, what is M365 good for and what is it not good for. And the idea of this note is to help organizations understand the reasoning and the processes that are taking place in the background. And ultimately, it's a part of governing AI so that you have an idea of how AI is arriving at the answers it's arriving to. One thing that stood out to me in this, though, is this transparency note here that says, in many AI systems, performance is often defined in relationship to accuracy. That is how often the AI system offers a correct prediction or output. Now, that had been my experience up until I started using Copilot. But with Microsoft 365, two different users might look at the same output and have different opinions how useful or relevant it is. So that means performance for these systems must be defined more flexibly. So I saw this and went, oh, I am not here in my head. I want things to be similar between users, not different. So as I dug into this transparency note, I started to understand more and more the architecture that sat behind Copilot and why it works differently for different users. So now that you've understood the word agent, I guess one of the things that I think is kind of important is to define that there's many, many ways that you can create agents in the Microsoft toolkit. And we kind of color grouped them here. So the first two are when you first get a Copilot license, one of the cool things that gets turned on is what's called a SharePoint agent. And an agent that sits in SharePoint is simply a agent that's grounded in the content in that library and uses the content in that library to try and answer your question as it sends it to the LLM. So very, very simple kind of knowledge chat agent that comes with every single SharePoint library if you want it. The one right before that, SharePoint Pay-as-You-Go, these are little agents that are built into SharePoint that you can use, anyone can use. They used to be included as part of a capability called SharePoint Premium. Microsoft has now made them pay as you go. They're not very expensive, but they're quite valuable and very bespoke, quick agent transactions. And most of that is for example, is when I add a document to a document library and I want to pull some information out of that document in order to give the document the right metadata. So it could be an expiry date for a contract or a summary of the document, or maybe I want to choose the topics of the document so it shows up in search. SharePoint Pay-as-You-Go features allow you to do that as you add documents to libraries. They take the document, send it to an LLM, extract some information out of it, and then they help put that in as metadata or as a column data inside of SharePoint. So these are kind of low complexity agents, super simple to build. As we move up the continuum, we get our Copilot agents. Now there are two different ways to create these. We can use what Microsoft is now calling Copilot Studio Lite, which is an agent builder that comes in the M365 app, or Copilot Studio, which is a completely different app from Microsoft, or a different agent building experience, more complex and requires more technical know-how. It's very, very similar to the Copilot Studio that you get if you're using Power Platform. And so as we move up this continuum, you can still use Copilot Studio, but there are more options or there are more capabilities to you. However, they cost more typically. You're building agents now with different toolkits or different tools that have different licensing around them. And then finally, as we move up to more complexity, we have directly creating agents with Azure, so AI Foundry, or right from code. So what I found with Copilot agents is as we go left in that continuum, these are the ones that are kind of low complexity. So they kind of work like a factory worker where they do the same job over and over and over again, or a junior assistant who's not that smart or hasn't been on the job very long, doesn't know where things are. And as we move more to the right, we get these higher complexity alternatives. So we're building agents that act like skilled handymen or seasoned craft people. And so this spectrum here is actually kind of a complexity or an ability spectrum that Microsoft has. Now, what I would find when I was talking to customers, they often were frustrated over what is Copilot a good fit for, and what is it a bad fit for. And the reason for that is because they wanted to answer the question, what are the use cases that we can experiment with, that we can build M365 agents with? And these use cases, when I would hear them or they would ask their users what they wanted to do, would often not be a good fit for Copilot. Sometimes they'd try it in Copilot and they'd spend a bunch of time and they were frustrated it wouldn't work. Every now and then it would actually work really well. And so I guess the rest of this presentation is to help you discern, why is that? Why does that happen that way? One thing I did notice when I was talking to clients is that there seemed to be this desire to exploit the M365 Copilot license. So in other words, we've already paid for Copilot. I want to build agents that leverage that license that we've already paid for. I don't want additional pay-as-you-go costs. And really that comes from these three different agents right here. I've actually made a table, and you're going to get access to this presentation, so you don't need to screenshot this, but this table, you'll see, goes into a lot of detail around each of these agents. And so in the bold there, you'll see that the SharePoint agent, the M365 Copilot agents, and the M365 Copilot agents, Copilot Studio is a mouthful. They're all licensed with a Copilot license. The one caveat to that is if you build an agent that is not autonomous, meaning it runs in the background and it doesn't get instigated or started by a human, that's considered autonomous, and that is not covered by the M365 Copilot user license. So we already are starting to have a little bit of complexity from a licensing standpoint there. What I found in my research was across this agent spectrum, there are a lot of things that I think users or people building agents need to know to help them understand which tool when. Like, when do I use Copilot? And is it good for this or is it good for that? And it comes across these different vertical or these different horizontal areas. The licensing implications, the quality and consistency that you're able to get, the models that sit underneath and whether or not you have control of them. Are you able to fine tune things? How is knowledge retrieved? Do you have control of that? So all of these things that you see on this list are things that we go into a lot more detail on. And inside of that detail, it helps you kind of pick the right tool for the right job. So let's talk about it like from a scenario standpoint, and then we're going to go into a bit of an education on how Copilot works, and then come back and revisit these scenarios again at the end. So in one case, we used Copilot to build a municipal chatbot. So we pointed it to their website. Now, this case actually is not something that you would use your Copilot license for, Copilot M365 license. You'd actually need pay-as-you-go because it would be an external website Copilot. We configured it to use the website as its knowledge. We built a large prompt, gave it instructions on voice and tone, and we instructed it to include references so that people could make sure that the data is something they could validate and not answer if it wasn't confident. It didn't work really well. There's some questions it answered well. As soon as this questions got complex, it really failed to answer the questions properly, sometimes hallucinating, sometimes giving the wrong information. It was inconsistent in whether or not it would provide references. In another situation, we built a contract comparison agent. So it was an agent that compared two contracts. So in this case, It was an IT department, and every year a contract would get renewed by vendors, and the vendors would just send the contract over and IT would sign it. And they wanted to know, well, did they change anything, or is this the same as the contract from the year before? So we could use Copilot to offer a legal perspective on these changes. We built an agent where they would upload both the contracts manually. So they would do it by just saying add file. And then we created a kind of detailed prompt that includes what logic to look for inside of these contracts. And it was very successful. It's consistently finds the right information between the two contracts and is able to effectively give the right advice prior to or instead of a legal review, which often happens in organizations with contracts you're signing for the third time. A third scenario, so building a knowledge agent. So it's a kind of a chatbot, if you will, to ground its information on a set of benefits content. Benefits content sat in SharePoint. It was across 20 pages. They actually were in PDFs in a SharePoint library. Mostly fail. The scenario, again, similar to the previous one that we're doing, a knowledge agent, it answered simple questions, but as soon as the questions became a bit more complex, like a retainer, which is a really kind of detail around, is my son's retainer covered? It's just a level of complexity that couldn't be discerned from the content by Copilot. And we'll talk about why in the end. Using Copilot to build a simple agent to review an inbox at the end of the day and let them know if they've not responded to anything important. It passed. It's a fairly simple use case. Reviewing an inbox for a day is just sort of a good level of content for Copilot to get through. So let's dissect Copilot. We'll walk through how Copilot works, and then we'll come back to answering those questions again. So this is a bit of a nerdy part of the presentation. I hopefully will keep it as high level as possible so that you understand what's happening here. But as we go through it, this is just to describe the complexity that sits behind AI that Copilot has removed from us. So in other words, Microsoft's tried to hide a lot of this complexity, but in the hiding it, we've lost some of the controls that help us make these AI things work really well. So if we follow that agent example, I'm going to walk you through this benefits chat agent bot answering questions about benefits. Let's say that the agent's been deployed to M365. We built it in Copilot Studio, and the knowledge sits in a SharePoint library called benefits resources and the PDF files. So the first thing you need to know is Copilot is actually indexing your content all the time in SharePoint and on your tenant. And the way it does that is through a brand new tenant indexer that comes online when you install your first M365 Copilot license. The second you deploy that, your tenant indexer starts to index your tenant. It's crawling SharePoint and your inbox, and it's your calendars, everyone's email. It's doing document processing. So turns out that large language models can't actually read binary files. So those binary files need to be broken up into text, and that process is called document processing. And then it creates a semantic index, so a relationship to all of your content. It actually creates two different indexes, a full text index and a semantic index. And it stores all this relationship and information into its own index. And it does that through a process called chunking. So instead of storing a single document, it stores many parts of the documents or chunks of document, usually indicated by the number of characters, so a 100-character chunk or a 200-character chunk. This, just FYI, the tenant indexer is built on the Azure search service, if you didn't know that already. And so the graph is also at work. If you're not familiar, Microsoft has this thing called the Office graph or the M365 graph, and that's also using signals to track how users are using or accessing content. So it's looking for recently used content from a user and tracking that in a database, peer-to-peer sharing. So who am I sharing with? Am I using any data such as third-party systems or the Dataverse or CRM? And all of this information is stored in Cosmo DB from Microsoft. And so many people think that the RAG or the process of Copilot is just the user prompt. You know, is my son covered for an orthodontic retainer? It goes immediately to the LLM that's sitting out there waiting to answer the question. Now, some limitations around an LLM is it can only handle 128,000 tokens, which sounds like a lot, but what that means is you can't send an M really big documents. You have to break them up for it. It also can't read binary files, so we have to send the LLM files that have already been document processed. That's why Microsoft's document processing beforehand. And so as we go through, we have this, is my son registered for an orthodontic container? First, we're looking to see, well, does this person have any preferences in the way that they like things responded to? So in Copilot, users can set preferences as memory. It also, any previous chat is also considered part of a RAG. So if there's a chat history, that chat history is also going to be used and sent off. That first prompt now goes to a thing called an orchestrator. And that orchestrator's job is to figure out, well, which LLM should answer. It turns out that Copilot doesn't use a single LLM. It uses many LLMs. It uses small language models and large language models. And one of the things the orchestrator is trying to figure out is, where do I go to get more information about this question? So in the case of, it sounds like an orthodontic retainer would be a benefits question. Maybe I'm going to go to the benefits area. And so the orchestrator is figuring out how to get the right content and information it needs to do the job. And it does this, after that, it does this by querying those content sources. And those content sources, as we talked about before, have already been indexed using the tenant indexer. So it's querying your SharePoint index. Now, it's informed by the graph. So Copilot's leveraging who I'm talking to and what I'm talking to, or what information I've recently accessed. It's not actually querying just once, but it's querying many times. We don't know how many, but it can run 2 or 3 queries by just changing the language of it, just to see if variations in the language bring back something different. And it's also only querying things that that user has access to. So anything that the user doesn't have access to because it's secured, the query won't return any information. When the query comes back, the Copilot creates a schema, which is basically a large data set that is the original prompt, but also additional memory, context, content, and it sends that off to the large language model. The large language model might work with the orchestrator to go back and forth. In other words, the orchestrator might actually go to the large language model twice or 3 times. It might use multiple models. And then in that large language model, Microsoft has programmed it to evaluate the risk. And this is something called responsible AI. So Microsoft's figuring out, well, are you asking for something harmful? Are you asking for something you shouldn't have? Like, are you wanting the model to create naked pictures for you? Probably shouldn't do that. So it's going to not allow those requests through. It's going to respond. Before it sends it to the user, it actually goes out to purview and determines whether or not that user is able to access the content. So it's looking for things like sensitivity labels. And then the user gets a response, finally, after all that. So we've just kind of talked about a lot of things that are happening here. I didn't actually use the names in every case, but this is all the RAG. Underneath the covers, we have models, but Copilot's obfuscating those and not telling them what it's doing. There might be agent routing that's happened at the orchestrator. We don't have any access to that. We know the model has a token limit, but Microsoft's managing that token limit process. The prompt and the prompt flow, what happens to the prompt when it's done, again, is happening in the orchestrator. We actually do, for Copilot, have some control of that when you're creating custom agents. The orchestrator can use some actions or tools. There are some limited ones available in Copilot. It goes out and retrieves documents, processes them. All of those have been happening behind the scenes through vectoring and semantic chunking. None of that is within our control. The responsible AI is something Microsoft is providing. We don't have any control of that either. And the way memory is used, or any of the settings in the model, such as temperature and top K, which are 2 settings in a large language model that control how flexible or how creative the model is, we have no access to any of that. We also have no access to ranking how content is used by the LLM. So is there some important that feels more important than others? We can't control any of that. So what can we control in this whole process? I'm going to walk through the same diagram, and we'll talk about how this is all put together. And this is probably starting to indicate where Copilot is good or not good. So in all these things, We have our tenant indexer. We can't control any of that. We can't control how quickly things are indexed or when they get indexed. In general, things are indexed within a day if they're added to SharePoint. If it's something that my inbox is receiving or my calendar, that's typically a lot faster, so within minutes. We can't control what is indexed, although we can limit some of the places that get indexed by putting exclusions on them. We can't add any third-party resources like file shares. We can add data resources through something called the Dataverse. So one of the things the tenant indexer is crawling is Dataverse locations, and that's one way to add indexes. We can't control document processing. Microsoft's doing the job of breaking out PDF files and Word documents, and it's only using its own processing. We also can't control whether or not there's document types that Copilot can't use. So for example, if you have a CAD file in a fully controlled AI system, we would just use a document processing tool that could read CAD files. In the case of Copilot, we can't do that. And so we have limitations on the kinds of files Copilot's going to work with. We don't control the index or the full text and how that gets organized. And we can't control the chunks. So how big the chunks are, how they relate to each other. In a typical AI project, we would control how big those chunks are so that we can make sure we're getting enough information or data back each time we're doing a search, instead of smaller little bits that perhaps don't give enough context. We don't control the context or memory or how it's used. It's quite hidden in Copilot as to where they even use that memory that you might have put into Copilot. We can control the orchestrator in as much as when we're creating agents, we can create a prompt, an agent flow, if we're using Copilot Studio. So there is some options there, but we're limited into the amount of transactions we can do or the kinds of things that orchestrator could do. So it's not in the completely free control world. We'd be able to go out and ping APIs and come back or process content. In the case of Copilot, we're just limited in the types of things we can do. We don't control the query or how the information is queried. So ultimately, we're not controlling what information is sent to the model to answer the question. We don't control the schema, so we don't create the RAG at the end that gets sent to the LLM. And we don't have any control of the responsible AI. So Microsoft's deciding what to do here. So there's situations where something we ask just might be rejected by Microsoft because the RAI doesn't allow it. And so, for example, I said some customers the other day that were trying to get Copilot to give some legal advice. And it was a kind of an appropriate use of trying to get legal advice on something, and Copilot was resisting giving that advice because of responsible AI. So for everyone on the call, what we've done, you don't need to remember all this because it's quite complex, but we've created a table that indicates all of these different components of the agent creation options and which tool is good for which processes. And if we go down and look at some of the details around this, so for example, in those Copilot app agents or the M365 agents, quality is often difficult to gain because the quality can be very variable. The models that are underneath it are not controlled by you. They can be changed at any time. It's going to be different answers per user. None of that's within our control. And so it can be very variable. Whereas you move to the right and you're able to create a lot more high quality based on choosing the right models, the configuration properties, et cetera, that you have available to you. Model choice, again, in those first few boxes, 4 of them, you don't really have a lot of options as to which models are being used. So it's abstracted. In fact, it's not only abstracted, it's model routing. So it's not even going to a single model, but it's going to many models and choosing which one to do on its own. As you move more to the green and purple parts of this, you have a lot more options of building directly into a model that's more stable, or models that you choose that you can keep as long as you want. Yeah, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on each of these. I just want you to know that you have some options here to look at this and see, how do these different options in the agent building toolkit work, which ones might be better for you to do different things, where do you have control of the RAG, and where do you not, and everything from the indexing, the vectoring, the knowledge retrieval, fine-tuning, and memory. We've kind of documented it all for you here, so you have a tool for you. So this last two really just sort of summarize some kind of basics around where these agents often play well. So you can see in the SharePoint agent, M365 Copilot app, and M365 agent, things like answering simple questions, personal productivity agents, or even department level agents where it's where you have kind of a refined and structured environment that you're asking questions from. Those can be good. But if you're automating more complex processes or something that's sort of enterprise scope, or has a lot of knowledge complexity to it, you're probably going to need to go up the continuum and move more to the right. Yeah, and then some design considerations for you there. So if we come back to these scenarios we discussed in the beginning, building a knowledge agent to ground on a set of benefits related questions or answer questions. Why did this fail in the first place? We don't know for sure, but it's possible that when that knowledge content was indexed, PDFs alone are not a great thing to index. They're going to be a little bit more difficult for a LLM, for a document processing to extract data from. So they can be challenging. We didn't have any index control, and we didn't control the chunking. So when we're answering a knowledge question, if the chunking is too small, it may not be able to get context of a situation, such as, oh, these answers are for people who are unionized, and the questions are for people who aren't unionized. Without chunking, we can't really make sure that those two pieces of knowledge get sent to the LLM at the same time, and that's why that might not work. We're not adding predictive weighting on anything, so we can't determine or can't use weighting as a way to determine whether or not an agent was sending the right information to the agent and prioritizing certain information based on it being more appropriate or likely better to answer the question. Yeah, and then you can't fine tune it. So this is probably why this was not a great scenario for that. What I would say in the case of knowledge agents, generally speaking, you're going to be kind of green and purple. So using custom models, I'd almost say every single, especially enterprise level knowledge agents should probably look at a specific model. So using ChatGPT, OpenAI 4.0 or 5, you're just going to get a lot more consistency in the results, and you're not at the whim of Microsoft changing the underlying models. So in the case of a data agent, you're definitely sitting up there at the purple, using AI Foundry, VS Code, and managing and wrangling your data. One thing we discovered was while you could use messy data and have the agent figure out in that messy data what to understand or how to pick the right answers from it, it was a very, very expensive transaction. So the agent would need to spend a lot of time trying to sort through the data, and we were running into a very, very expensive token count, meaning we were paying a lot for the agents to run. So even when an agent or AI can do something, it doesn't mean it should do that. So we had to rethink our data and our data structures and fine-tune it, just like we would for BI, fine-tune it for reporting. And then the last use case here, I'm throwing out as a test to see how well you have been listening today. If you were to use a SharePoint agent in a SharePoint library to query that library and find contracts that are expiring that year, how well will Copilot do? And just to put it out there, this library has 300 contracts and a mix of PDFs, image files, and Word documents. So the considerations on this, just knowing there's different file types means that the chunking and the way that document processing is working in behind the scenes is going to be different. That's a kind of quality potential issue here for an agent. Copilot also is going to limit the amount of things it can send to the model, and it's probably going to cap those off at 10 to 20. So if we have more than 10 to 20 items in this library that are expiring, we would probably fail. And inside of the contracts, I don't know if the expiry dates are obvious to an LLM or a human. And so that could also be an issue. in this one, what's interesting is if I were building this one, I'd actually go backwards in the continuum and really consider SharePoint pay-as-you-go the first option here, because that would allow us to pre-process the documents, extracting out the exact information we want. So as I add a contract to the library, I can build a prompt that says, pull out the expiration date of this contract and put it as a piece of metadata. And now all of a sudden I have something that's reliable that I can query, and I don't have to depend on large language models or what's being sent to the large language models to get them. So this is an instance where that particular scenario might actually be better to go simpler. So that was a lot to cover for an hour almost in this. So as you think about your learning journey in I know this was quite a complex presentation. Hopefully you got to learn a little bit about how Copilot works and add to your knowledge of what tool to use when. I'd suggest everyone build a plan around this experimentation and learning. I think it's an important part of the journey with AI. And take this presentation and continue to get to know that Copilot architecture so that you can choose the right use cases. And if you're looking for more advanced knowledge agents, which is kind of one of the big common ones we see in organizations, start to explore using custom engine agents or Azure Search, which allow you to have a lot more fine sort of control and granularity on how those agents work. That is it for the presentation. And I'll just say one last thing. We can help. If you're stuck in your values, guidelines, or policies part of the journey, come chat with us. If you're looking to secure, govern, or deploy Copilot, we have lots of tools and resources we've built, like RACI for the organization, and tools to set those default purview settings. Or if you want something more complex and you're looking to just brainstorm or have someone help you build those, we could do that too. So I'll put this on for questions, see if there's anything else. Does anyone have any parting thoughts?
You're getting a ton of compliments, Brian, on your presentation in our chat. Folks are finding it very insightful. So thank you for that. There is a pretty detailed question. Can you see the Q&A? I can read it out loud, but I think it'd be helpful if you also took a look at it. I can read it.
Yeah, testing Copilot retrieval API, and we find it's very powerful when even querying over 6,000 traditional OCR documents. We don't need it to answer questions like chat-based agents, but simply uses to find the right documents. Document library having no traditional metadata index since it's from our legacy document library. Didn't need to worry about building our own RAG for our use. What's your thoughts on this? I mean, I think that's really fantastic. There's a lot of probably parts to this to dissect as to why this is working well. And I would love to know kind of the format of the original documents. You said it's OCR, so it sounds like maybe they're image files or something like that. And I think what your question kind of points to is the need for experimentation. What we'll typically do, I always like to try to get Copilot to fail. So this is a great scenario where using that API to get the information out first is a great first test and see what happens. My suspicion is, and we can have a longer conversation on this, is that perhaps something inside of the kinds of questions you're asking, or the way the documents are formatted, or the simplicity of the questions might be kind of aiding this to work really well for you. So I'm super happy to hear that's working really well in Copilot API. I can say this for people that aren't doing this. When you start to use the Copilot API, you might run into issues with licensing. So there are scenarios in which that is allowed within the Copilot M365 license, and others where it's not. So just be thoughtful about that too.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. And then there's another one from Andrew. In your estimation, what tool would you use to build an agent for a website?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, when we're heading to chatbots, agents, and I'm assuming by agent for a website, we're probably talking about like an advanced sort of knowledge agent or search agent that's answering questions that sit on the website. I generally return towards the kind of end of the spectrum where we're either using our own model. So I'd say it's really important when you have anything that's public, anything that's in front of customers, that you have control of the model. Microsoft has changed the model in Copilot about 3 or 4 times. It's constantly changing the algorithms. As you all know, we have, or some of you might know, we have access to ChatGPT 5.0, but that is not how the default models respond yet. All of that just leaves anything that's public or anything that's created for a user base that's outside of your organization highly risky. So choosing an option where you get to choose the model, so the last green one or the two purples are where I'd head for that one. And this is a really perfect scenario for having Azure SharePoint Search in the background, doing a lot of that indexing and finding content and reviewing it.
Awesome.
We are at time.
Thank
it's
you,
11
Brian.
o'clock.
Yeah, we're at
So
time.
if there's any other questions, feel free to send them our way. We have a couple upcoming events too that Amy, you probably want to just quickly chat with.
No, this is great. You can just go to gravityunion.com/events. We keep all that updated. Thank you all so much for being here. And like Brian said, please reach out if you have any questions. Brian really is our resident AI expert, as you can tell. Thank you again, everyone. And thank you, Brian. This was excellent.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, everyone.